Hello, MCU fans. Today is going to be my breakdown, reaction, and a whole lot of theories for Loki Season 2, Episode 1. I apologize for this one taking me a little while to get out, but man, there was so much to this episode, but I promise it will be worth the time it took, and make sure to stay to the end because there is a crazy theory at the end. Now, obviously, there will be lots of spoilers, so make sure you've seen the episode first, but assuming you have, let's dive right in and see what we can find out. Don't forget, for October, we are running a contest on the channel. All you have to do to enter is be a subscriber and leave a comment. 5 random winners will be announced in early November and can choose from one of these 4 books or one of these 4 steel books. Best of luck. Okay, so I also want to mention that I do have a quote-unquote prep for Loki series. I've had a lot of fun putting this together over the last, year, really. So if you watch some of these videos, I would recommend watching them maybe in this order. But yeah, check them out if you haven't seen them because they go through a lot of the theories in detail that I'm going to kind of touch on at a high level in this video to not repeat myself. But yeah, check those out. You'll have a lot of fun with them. Also, it's worth mentioning that the timeline has been updated on Disney+, but really just the image. They now have an image for Loki Season 2. Notice they did not put 2 separate images for each season, so similar to I Am Groot, they combined them into one, but I think that works because both I Am Groot and, as I theorized, Loki are pretty much watch them back to back. Now, I've already had some people ask, well, what about the post-credit scene in Quantumania? Should I watch that before or after Loki Season 2 if I'm doing a chronological watch? Well, my opinion is you watch both seasons of Loki back to back. And we'll talk about a little more of why as we get into the video. But anyway, timeline has indeed been updated. Okay, so speaking of Season 1, I want to go back to Season 1 because this is really interesting. So remember, at the end of Season 1, Sylvie uses her magic and boots Loki through a time door. Watch when he comes out. Now, look really closely, and you can see almost a shadow image of him coming out of the door in the TVA headquarters. Then see, there it is again. Now there's a second one. The first one's still there, and there's a second one. And you see both of them. And now there's a third one, and you can still see the after images of the first 2 as he comes all the way out. So notice, boom, boom, boom. And when you listen to it, like in real time, you can hear thip, 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 thip. Like 3 noises as he's coming through. So what do I think this was trying to say? Well, first of all, it's fascinating because you can see this in the finale to the previous season. So they were already thinking about this time-slipping idea. At least I think they were. So why is he time-slipping? Well, I think the answer falls in the TemPad that Sylvie grabs off of He Who Remain's desk. Because it's not just a TemPad. It is a TemPad and a time twister. Remember, in the first season, how we saw multiple times that different people who had a hold of these time twisters, Loki used it, but also He Who Remains used it, rewound you, basically sent you back in time to somewhere else. So his little device was both, versus the TVA had a TemPad and had the time twisters. I think Sylvie, who had no idea how to use his device, obviously, and just started pushing random buttons, basically time twisted him, turning him into time slipping. At the same time, she sent him through a time door. So that's my guess as to how this happened, but I just think it's really cool visual. They gave us a hint even back in Season 1's finale. All right, so this is also a sneaky little move they played. So in Season 1's finale, we see both the TVA in the present time and in the past. At this point, it's in the present. They're looking at things going nuts because He Who Remains been killed, and Hunter B-15 and Mobius are discussing. Mobius says, no turning back now, and B-15 says, who said anything about turning back? So that's in the present. Then they jump to this scene, which is actually in the past. Very sneaky. But these lines are interesting. They didn't show these in the previously on section, but they did say these in Loki Season 1's finale. That's what? 63 new branches in this unit alone? Does he want us to just let them all branch? Well, at this point, how are we going to stop it? And that's when Loki jumps in and says, we can't. Okay, so this is really interesting. That means that at whatever point Loki went back in the past, they were also experiencing an issue. I mean, 63 new branches in this unit alone. Something crazy was going on. That is fascinating. So, and of course, they made us think, oh, we're still in the present, and, that was caused by He Who Remains being killed. No, whatever is causing these branches obviously is not He Who Remains being killed. So, because there he is, he's right there, he's the statue. So this is a point in time in the past when he hadn't hidden himself and hadn't created the false timekeepers. So I'm wondering if, I hope they explain, and I'm wondering if they will explain that whatever those 63 branches were, whatever bad thing happened, that's what made He Who Remains go, we got to start over. I got to wipe your minds, and I'm creating the timekeepers, and we're trying this again. I also think it's really interesting that Kate Herron basically tricked us a bit, which she was intentionally misleading, and I don't have an issue with that. But in The Hollywood Reporter, after the season finale, she answered a question about the TVA residing outside of time. And she says, so the way I see it in my head is that the TVA exists outside of space and time. But reality and everything as we understood it has completely changed in the last few minutes. With the multiverse branching, how do we know the TVA still exists in that way? We don't know. And I suppose that's a big question that will be answered as the show goes on. But in my head, the intention is that Sylvie thinks she's sending him back to the TVA, but because of the way time and branches are crossing with each other outside the window, Loki has unfortunately been sent back somewhere very different. So reality has shifted just by the nature of what He Who Remains said. And the idea is that he's in this alternate TVA now. So you can see why people, myself included, were confused and thought he went to an alternate TVA, maybe some branch TVA, because that's what she said. But I'm wondering if she was being intentionally misleading. It is an alternate TVA. It's one in the past. I mean, it's a stretch of the word alternate, but yeah, you could call that an alternate TVA. And it's also interesting when she said it used to exist outside time and space, and now it apparently doesn't. That's interesting too. We'll see if that gets unpacked in this season. But I think what's really important is that this was sneaky. I'll give her credit for a nice little mislead. So anyway, we definitely know that that he's in the past. Also, it is worth noting, even Mobius didn't say that he's outside of time. He just said time passes differently. So I don't know if this idea of being outside of time is one that was created, by us fans, and then Kate Herron kind of responded, yeah, he's outside time and space. Yeah, sure. Because in the series, they never say that. They never actually, the Citadel at the end of time is, yes, I think that's outside of time and space, but the TVA does not have to be. Okay, so anyway, now we know that Loki is in the past, and he's at a point where He Who Remains didn't hide himself. Notice he's got his statue there, picks up right up from last season. And Mobius has no clue who he is, but he does know he's basically a variant because of the way he's dressed, probably. So Loki takes a dive out the window. This is a really cool shot of him falling. You can kind of see him in the middle there. He passes by this sign, which I really hoped, it was just in the trailer, but I really hoped we'd finally be able to read it better. When the episode came out, I can't. I think it says timeline preservation, but I don't know what the last word says. But remember, even in the past, they had the 63 branches just in the one unit. So something crazy was going on. So this sign was probably a red alert. So even in the past, they were having this issue. All right, so he lands in a taxi cab, and you can tell this ain't going to end well. First, they demolish the statue. That's pretty funny. And then, boom, he crashes through the window. I can't tell if the driver's okay or not. It doesn't sound like it. It sounds like the driver probably just got squished by the car. But who knows? Maybe they're okay. Loki said the driver was okay. Maybe so. And then this is interesting. I think this is just an Easter egg at most, if not maybe nothing. Could be just nothing, but let me know what you think. It's been rumored that Casey is listening to, on his headset there, the same podcast, notice Calm Your Mind and Relax, the same podcast that Mark Spector was listening to. Well, actually, technically, Stephen Grant, personality at this point, was listening to. And it was to try to stay awake, because he knew whenever he went to sleep, the Mark Spector personality came out. And notice it's saying, hello and welcome to Staying Awake. Let's start by trying to solve a puzzle. So I don't know if it's the same. I've just heard that said. Let me know if you've heard any specific confirmation versus just hearsay and rumor. But either way, I just think it's a fun little Easter egg. I don't think Casey stole this from Mark Spector or whatever. You never know, I guess. In a branch, he could have. So interesting. All right, so then we see that Loki's time slipping has indeed impacted the future when it changed the past, because he knocks the monitor off, it cracks the floor, and then when he time slips back to the present, we now hear Casey going, oh, that crack? Oh, that's been there as long as I can remember. But obviously, the crack didn't happen until Loki broke that monitor. So now this is my opinion, because I know there's some have other opinions, but I believe this is the butterfly effect, basically what we saw in Back to the Future or in movies like Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, which is interesting because we were told that's impossible, right? In Endgame, we were told that is not how it works. You cannot change your own past. But I do think it's important to note that was using the quantum realm. When they were doing all the time travel, both in Endgame as well as in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., for fans of that series, it was a fantastic 7th season, the time travel was using the quantum realm. This is Kang's tech. I have always believed that Kang has mastered time travel without creating branches, and thus allowing the butterfly effect, which I think is what we're seeing here. So we'll see it more in a moment, but now Mobius is trying to decide, what do we do? Do we just tell everyone that everything they believed is wrong and all your gods are dead? It's a very interesting dilemma. Would you rather be ignorant, like in the Matrix, and go back in the Matrix and enjoy the steak burger or the steak filet mignon, even if it's fake? So what? Let me forget that and enjoy it. Interesting question, right? So this is probably a good thing because he tries to call up Miss Minutes and Miss Minutes doesn't work. Now, I have a theory on that because it's kind of weird. He who remains dies, right? And suddenly everything branches. Why? What would make just the fact that he who remains died cause everything to branch? Because theoretically, the TVA would still be running like normal, would see whenever there's a branch that needs to be addressed and would go address it. Well, this is an interesting hint as to why. If Miss Minutes is no longer working, is Miss Minutes somehow linked up to he who remains himself? Because Miss Minutes has seemed to be sentient. You might remember last season, Loki was swatting Miss Minutes, and Miss Minutes jumped around. So I'm wondering if they're somehow linked, and if Miss Minutes went down when he remains died, then are they no longer even aware of how to address these? Sure, it shows on the monitor it's branching, but if you don't know where to go, you can't prune it. So just a theory, let me know what you think, but I'm wondering if Miss Minutes quit working because he who remains died. All right, so then this dude, oh my gosh, he is so sus. I mean, first of all, he starts mocking Mobius. Oh, this one here. Is this one on the sacred timeline? Pointing to the jet skis. Is this one calling your name, Mobius? Oh, what a jerk. Plus, the fact that he's got his number on his hands, X5. Oh, come on, dude. Really? Or on his gloves there? That's lame. But this is interesting. So we know from the credits that Hunter X5, right, his gloves, is Rafael Casal. Well, we know from the trailers, Rafael Casal is playing Zaniac later. So, and you can kind of see it in his face there. Obviously, his hair is different. He's got rid of the scruff under his chin. But yeah, what's going on there? Man, this dude, we need to keep an eye on this dude. Because we also know from the trailer, he ultimately gets captured. What is up with this guy? So anyway, very, very interesting. Keep an eye on him because I don't know what's going on with him. All right, so he then says, General Dox and Judge Gamble would like to see you in the war room. So we learn that both generals and judges are meeting and that there's a war room. So a lot going on there. All right, then on the way to the war room, we get this fake apology, because this doesn't seem like a real apology, when my man says, Mobius, I was just doing my job. Of course, this guy is the guy that pruned him last season. Well, I like this little commentary on just doing your job. When Mobius kind of says, you mean pruning me? Yeah, well, I guess you were just following orders. Yeah, I wonder if that was a little nod to the terrible excuse of atrocities that have been done, such as at the Holocaust in the worst example, or worst case example, where people were just following orders. So yeah, sorry, that's not a real apology when you go, I was just following orders. You need to say, by the way, I'm sorry for pruning you. But nope, he didn't say that. So I'm not sure I totally trust him, but we'll see. We'll see. All right, then in the past, because we keep jumping back and forth, the same war room they're heading into, Loki is in, and we discover the 5 images of seemingly the team that ruled the TVA. I think those 5 are, obviously, He Who Remains, the Kang that was exiled in the Quantum Realm, and then the 3 main Kang Council leaders that we see at the end of Quantumania. So very cool, very interesting. All right, then we see that it looks like He Who Remains pulled an Odin, and instead of, getting rid of this wall, he just covered over it. Because in the present, we see the same war room, and it's just been covered over with the facade. So kind of interesting. All right, so then they're listening on a tape player. I love that. All this tech from the 60s and 70s, right? Maybe the 80s at the most. Very interesting. But anyway, Loki's testimony is being reviewed, and Loki says, you're all variants, everyone who works at the TVA. Now, keep in mind, because we're going to talk about it in a moment, that monitor there. And notice all the information on it. It's really hard to make out in this particular scene, even if you zoom in as best you can, although I'm pretty sure that we do have an idea what it says there, and we're going to come back to it in a moment. Okay, so then they're listening again to Loki, who says the timekeepers didn't create you; they kidnapped you from the timeline and erased your memories. And of course, there, laying on the table, is the beheaded timekeeper's head from last season. So very cool visual. All right, then in the past, Loki is listening to the same recorder, but just a different recording. And in this one, as if we couldn't tell just from his voice, the closed captioning confirms it's he who remains, saying, Ravonna Renslayer, you are quite a marvel, which is a little maybe Easter egg pun on Marvel Comics. But we learned that, yes, they were indeed together, presumably ultimately as lovers, but certainly as partners. Now, this monitor, they have a much closer shot of it, and we're able to zoom in, and we can see that it over on the left or on the right, rather, it says timeline, so you can pick where you want to listen to on the timeline. And on the bottom, it says event date vector, and it has the date 6/12/2321. What on earth? What's up with that? Now, Kang in the first season mentioned he's from the 31st century, which is consistent with the comics. So what is going on with 2321? I would have expected, 3000 something. So is that not true? Maybe he isn't from the 31st century, or did he do some stuff in the past? Because 2321, obviously, that's like 300 years in the future. What on earth? So the question is this the date it was recorded, or is this the date someone is listening to it? So, because it could be that this recording was done in 2321, or it could be Loki right now is in 2321. I don't know, right? Or it could be it means nothing and we weren't supposed to think this hard. But I just wanted to point it out because that is very, very interesting. So anyway, he keeps listening to the tape, and it's he who remains saying, I will be proud to lead with you. You made a difference in this war. Thank you for being on my team. So if that date, the 2321, was when this was being recorded, then that means the multiversal war was in 2321? Interesting. Anyway, keep that in mind. We'll just see if that pans out at all in the episodes to come. But there was certainly enough work to put that date on there that you have to think it has some relevance. Okay, then this dude. Really? Nap time? They're talking about whether or not they were wiping out entire timelines, and he's sleeping. It is the weirdest group of people in this war room. They're so weird. But anyway, so the judge is asking, if we don't protect the sacred timeline, well, what are you suggesting? And that's when Hunter 15 says, hey, we haven't been protecting. We've been destroying. These are people with lives on those branches. And I love this look on Mobius's face as it's sinking in. He has killed billions, trillions, zillions of people over his time. And he's realizing not only has he been living a lie, but he's been genocide. It's basically genocide. Now, maybe it was genocide for a greater purpose. That's obviously going to be the big storyline behind Secret Wars. And when we get to that, and whether or not that's the right answer and whether or not that's the right call. But nonetheless, it's sinking in, and I love that look on his face. That's great. So this judge says, all my life, I've handed down the same verdict. But the TVA has to change, and it has to start now. And let me point out, X5 is so weird. He's just standing next to this judge, creepily close to the judge the whole time. And they're going to whisper to each other in a moment. There's some weird relationship going on between those two. That's the bottom line. But then, right on cue, Loki time slips from the past into the present, prunes the wall, the facade on the wall, so that everyone, if they had any doubt, can now see, yeah, you are living a lie, a total lie. Then he brings up Sylvie's name, and immediately this general, jumps up. Sylvie, where is she? And then whispers over to good old X5, the timekeepers are fake, but their warnings were real. We need to know what happened at the end of time. Okay, hold on a minute. I don't think anybody brought up end of time. Maybe I missed it, and leave in the comments if anybody is aware for certain that they mentioned the end of time. I think she knows way more than she's letting on, because she wants Sylvie really badly, and she seems to know about the end of time. Very, very interesting. So she says, find Sylvie. She's the reason we're in this mess. All right, so Then, I do love this. Once they leave the war room, the rapport between these two picks right up. When Loki explains that he was kicked through a time door, Mobius is like, well, I'd ask who won, but... And Loki's like, well, it was a draw. Because remember, he always wants to be the superior Loki. And Mobius is like, so you kicked each other through the time doors simultaneously? I love it. And Loki's like, forget all that. Stop it. This is what we need to talk about. This is what we need to deal with. This is the war, and it's on its way. So the irony that this facade, in this case, is true, that's drawn on the wall. Well, of course, you wonder what's behind that. Maybe he should chisel that away and see what's behind that artwork. But anyway, he's saying, hey, we got stuff we got to do. But then Mobius is really trying to figure this out when he's told, hey, you have had your memories wiped. And he obviously did it more than once. That's freaky. So not just once, but multiple times he's been wiped and reset. Kind of like the Eternals. That's kind of wild, huh? But then, I love it, Mobius says, I have no memory of having my memory wiped. Yeah, that means it worked. That means it worked. So then he's trying to ask, well, where did you come from? Where were you? What do you mean the past? And Loki's like, well, here, the past TVA. And Mobius is like, no, there is no past TVA. So once again, I'm left wondering, Mobius, how do you think time works in the TVA? How can there not be a past? What happened a second ago? Is that not the past? And in fact, this sign up here makes it even more confusing because it says, limit your lunch break to 17 minutes. Well, 17 minutes later, there's a past. So again, I'm not saying this is wrong or anything like that. I'm more just saying I would love to sit down with Mobius and go, okay, dude, walk me through this. How do you think time works in the TVA? Because all he said is it's different. There is no past, but he hasn't really explained it. So anyway, just kind of funny. By the way, 17 minutes for lunch, man, that's hardcore. I mean, that is hardcore. Anyway, then I love this because he says, let me call Miss Minutes. And Loki's like, no, you can't trust her. You can't trust her. It's just as well because she's not working. But nonetheless, do not call Miss Minutes. Bad news. Very bad news. So Mobius wants this time slipping fixed. He says, before we go after Sylvie and try to find her, we got to take you down to repairs and advancement. And then we get to see some of the nasty time slipping. Look at this. I mean, look at his arm. Look at his eyeball. Look at that. Look at his nose just peeling off, the lower part of his mouth. I mean, if you slow pause this time slipping, it's like a horror show. Look at his teeth are coming out. Look at that. Oh, it's just groaning and grunting. Oh, and his eye socket. Oh, and then I don't even know how to describe that. That's just sick and repulsive. And that's why Mobius is like, okay, I can't keep looking at it because it's horrible. It's terrible. It looks like you're being born or dying or both at the same time. Yes, it does. It is so nasty. And then they pan over to that dude in the elevator, or that lady in the elevator. That's pretty funny. But anyway, they finally get down to see Ouroboros, or OB, and down in RNA. And what a great entrance. Ki Hargon is so fantastic in this. I love him. He was great, of course, a short round in Indiana Jones, and then now more recently in Everything, Everywhere, All at Once. But yeah, fantastic find. Love him. Probably his Ouroboros name is after the snake, which consumes its own tail, which comes up with this circular imagery we've seen repeatedly about time goes in a circle, goes in a loop. And also even in Endgame, that's how Tony Stark figured out time travel, was the Mobius strip. So yeah, very interesting that OB, or Ouroboros, is now basically the one who's created all this tech. He's the tech. He's the Q from a James Bond standpoint. All right, so then this is interesting. Once again, you got to wonder, how the heck is time working here? Because Mobius visited him 400 years ago. 400 years ago. Of course, Mobius doesn't even remember it. He tries to play it off like he remembers it, but he doesn't, because he keeps saying, oh, I stayed for a while. And OB's like, no, you left right away. So his mind has been wiped. He doesn't remember this, but still, 400 years ago. So I'm going to throw out a theory here that thanks to the Scott Lang book, we may know what He Who Remains is doing and why Mobius can live over 400 years, basically. So in the book, which I think it's a great book. I did a video on this. Go check out the video, and I go through the whole book. But when he's talking about the experience where he was tested, I guess, for time travel and came back as a teenager, as an old man, and as a baby, he says, experiencing life with my, and here's the key, fully conscious, present-day, adult Scott brain. But inside those Scott at different ages of life bodies changed me. I wasn't really quite the same at all. take my brief foray into adolescence. What I felt was this sudden wave of contempt for my superhero friends. Now, the only thing I saw them as was super annoying grown-ups. So what he's saying is his mind retained everything. He had his present-day mind, but he was in the body of all these different ages. So basically in Endgame, they invented immortality. So they never do anything with it, but they invented it. Well, what if he who remains is doing something with it? What if, for example, he had everybody in the TVA on a loop where they were sent back into their, even let's just say 1 second ago body or 10 second ago body? Not like their body moved around. I mean, just physically, they were transported into the body, just like Scott was here, from 10 seconds ago. And it was on an automatic loop over and over and over. He would basically create immortality, but immortality you wouldn't even be aware of. You would have no idea that you were even aging. Just a thought. I have no idea if that's where they're going, but I think it's interesting how this book came out right before Loki, and it has this discussion about this very, very interesting scene from Endgame. So let me know what you think in the comments. I may be going on a limb on this, but it does seem like that is how you could create immortality, and I'm wondering if He Who Remains did that very thing. All right, so Obi says, hey, Mobius was the last person to visit. So not only has Mobius visited him 400 years ago, but that was the last visitor he got. And I think that's why Obi's mind has never been wiped, is basically he stays down here and just does his job. He says he doesn't sleep practically. He just runs from job to job to job. So everybody else's mind has been wiped, sounds like multiple times, but not his. Okay, that makes sense. So then Loki does this again. Look at this. Oh, that's so nasty. And that one, oh, his nose, ugh, and his arms going crazy, and he's flying off to the side, and he's out. So this is when I really think it's revealed that we're seeing the butterfly effect with this time slipping, because OB says it's time slipping, but as he and Mobius discussed, that shouldn't be possible in the TVA. Well, we then see it in full effect, because on the little split screen here, we see in the past, notice he doesn't have glasses, which is interesting. So he did age a little bit, enough that his eyes needed glasses, I guess. That's interesting. But still, he's over 400 years old. But he's saying in the past, it's impossible to time slip in the TVA. And then suddenly he goes, oh, wait, a long time ago, Loki came to see me complaining about time slipping. Now you could argue, oh, he just remembered it now. And so this is not butterfly effect, it's some type of closed loop. Maybe the way it's edited, they didn't make it seem that way, but this one makes it really clear. Because in the past, he goes, look, I've built a temporal aura extractor. And he puts it down in a little special space. In the present, he's like, no, I don't know how to do it. Wait, yes, I do. It's down here. So I think it's just really clear this is butterfly effect. And if it's not, if this is really some type of closed loop time travel, I'm just going to be kind of annoyed at Marvel for tricking us because they sure edited it to make it look like butterfly effect. And what I mean by butterfly effect is Back to the Future, right? He went in the past, rewrote the past, and made himself disappear. Or like in Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. If you've never seen that, by the way, you got to see that movie. It's great. Keanu Reeves' first role, fantastic. But they would do things where they would realize they need to get out of a certain trap, and so they would go, hey, remember later, we got to run in the past and put such and such here at this location. And then suddenly, boop, it appears. So the butterfly effect is you go back in your own past, do something that immediately rewrites history and appears in the future. That's what I think is happening here. And if that wasn't enough evidence, Marvel just put out on their YouTube channel some videos, and they're all silly, but there's one called The Butterfly Effect. How interesting, right? Now, I will say up front, it is not really the butterfly effect. It's Miss Minutes being silly. But still, the video is called Butterfly Effect. So in the video, she says, hey, y'all, Miss Minutes here. Times have changed at the TVA, but our goal of preserving timeline integrity hasn't. Of course, accidents do happen. And this dude squishes a butterfly by accident. Oh, poor butterfly. Then Miss Minutes says those pesky accidents can irreparably destroy reality, but we're here to help. So you think, oh, she's going to fix the butterfly effect, right? Somehow save that butterfly? No, they just released a new one. Now just fill out a few forms and we'll fix your catastrophic mistake in a jiffy. So again, this is a joke video, but nonetheless, I think the fact that they did a video about the butterfly effect was to get us to be thinking that when we watched the Loki series. And then the video ends with the butterfly, which has now been brought back to life, then being eaten by a bird. So poor butterfly. It's tough to be a butterfly. But more importantly, I do think this might explain how on earth Miss Marvel was able to impact her own timeline, because I have long theorized her bangles are Kang tech, just like I think the 10 rings are Kang tech. So she didn't mean to create a closed loop, but she did go back in her own timeline and do something that then altered her future. So that's one example where I think it solves it. And then also Deadpool. Maybe this explains how Deadpool did his time travel in Deadpool 2, because maybe Cable either invented the same type of time travel that Kang does, not using the quantum realm, right? Or maybe Kang even provided it. Wouldn't that be insane if in Deadpool 3, Kang ends up providing a Cable with this tech? But anyway, we know that Deadpool did absolutely do the butterfly effect in this movie, because he went back in time and saved his girlfriend. He went back in time and saved some of his team members that shouldn't have been on the team to begin with. He went back in time and killed crappy Deadpool from Wolverine Origins, and of course went back in time and prevented the Green Lantern movie from ever being made. Smart move. So I'm wondering if, since the rumors have it at least, that after Loki, one of the next big multiversal things is Deadpool 3, well, maybe that's when we're going to find out that he was using Kang tech, that's what Cable had. Very interesting. All right, so then we learn how they're going to save Loki. How are they going to make this work? So Obi says when something is pruned, it's released from time, and the extractor will pull you into the present. So Loki needs to prune himself, like you're actually going to do it on your own. But yes, you have to, because that releases you from time, and the extractor will pull you back into the present. Then he explains you need to get to the temporal loom so the extractor can pull Loki directly out of the time stream. Okay, great. That didn't sound too bad, right? Well, then we learn the risks. That kind of temporal energy will peel the skin right off of you. Oh, but it gets worse, because Loki has to violently rip himself from every thread of time and space. Oh, and by the way, have you heard about how if you fall into a black hole, you turn into spaghetti? He brings up, of course, hopefully that won't happen to him, but I do think it's interesting. He brings up black hole and spaghetti, because when I think spaghetti, I think this scene, which granted there was no black hole in Quantum Mania, but it was, a time related issue that caused him to turn into spaghetti. Very interesting. And then in the end credits, they mention black holes and the end of the universe. And of course, that's been the theory all along by many scientists, that we have the Big Bang followed by the Big Crunch. So the Big Bang creates the universe, and then ultimately we fall into a black hole or a singularity that crunches it all back down again. So maybe there's something to this black hole stuff. I've even heard theories, MT, who does YouTube breakdowns, has said that he thinks the TVA is in a black hole. Okay, that's possible. It's a little out there for me, but they do keep bringing up black holes. And of course, in Loki season 6, we saw these black holes that then led into the timeline. So maybe that's where the TVA is. I don't think they're in the quantum realm anymore. I used to think that. I don't know anymore. I don't think so. I don't know where they are, but I guess they could be in a black hole. It's possible. Anyway, I'm also curious if anybody thought about whether the flickering from these lights, and they say it's because of the power surges, but is this flickering maybe Morse code? I don't know Morse code, so I can't tell, but it'd be really interesting if that turned out to be the case. I suspect it's just because of the overload on the temporal loom that is causing power surges. But hey, if it's Morse code and somebody can figure it out, let me know. So speaking of this temporal loom, so they're heading up there, and they're saying, Obi is saying the branching is overloading the temporal loom. And then he talks about the fact it's all in the TVA guidebook. Loki's like, the what? And there's a really cool shot where Obi just tosses it back and Loki catches it all in one shot. They must have done multiple takes to do that. But now Loki's got it there. And Obi says, I wrote it myself. What a shock, right? Of course, the guy's a genius. So as they head in, notice on the floor in the second line there's a warning of the likelihood of spaghettification. Yikes. Just does not sound good. But then these doors are really cool. I don't think it's anything more than an Easter egg, but notice the X in the middle and then almost what looks like the cerebro eye of the X-Men. And even as the doors open, they're kind of like the doors from the X-Men movies. So very cool. I don't think this means X-Men are coming because of this scene or anything like that, or the TVA. Although you never know. But it's just a fun little Easter egg, a visual Easter egg. But okay, so then Obi gives us some very important information. Says it's where the raw time is refined into physical timelines. Wild, raw time being refined into a physical timeline. And of course, he's talking about the loom. And he says the issue is we need to prune those extra branches. Well, of course, everybody jumps in. No more pruning. That's genocide. We're done with that. It's like, oh, well, that's a problem because it's not constructed to weave together so many branches. Okay, this to me is so cool. All right, so you can see out the window there. You have basically the loom is sucking in the raw time, as Obi said, turning it into timelines and weaving it together, weaving the branches. So that, to me, is the sacred timeline on the right and obviously chaos on the left. Well, that goes right with what Michael Waldron said in an interview 2 years ago, where he said the sacred timeline might look almost like intertwined strands of rope fluctuating and spiking here or there. 2 years ago, he was already giving this visual that we now finally see in season 2 of the rope. So remember, the visual that we saw in Loki season 1, it didn't look so much like a rope. They weren't intertwined, but that was just maybe the way it looks if you're standing in the Citadel looking out. But we're definitely seeing in season 2, it looks like a rope. Those look like the strands of a rope. So it all really comes together. And that's why I've said I think the sacred timeline is more than one timeline. And I actually think we're going to see it's a lot of timelines. It's not just one or two. It is a whole bunch of timelines. The bottom line is none of those timelines create a Kang. That's why they do the pruning and send it off to the void, is if that's a timeline that's going to give us a Kang, it's got to go there to be destroyed or maybe destroyed. That's my big theory at the end. I'm going to talk more about that. So hold on to that thought. But anyway, also, I think this sacred timeline construct that He Who Remains created is how he isolated the timeline. Remember when he gave his speech at the end of season 6, he said, I isolated our timeline. That is how I think this loom is taking the branches and weaving them into this sacred timeline, and it's also isolating it, protecting it. It's like it's on an island, was one of the interviews that Kate Herron gave. And I covered that in one of those earlier Prep for Loki videos. But so he says, I isolated the timeline. Then I actually think this is what we're seeing here is what happens when the loom ultimately quits working. My guess is by the end of season 2, the loom is demolished or turned off or something, because we're seeing everything, just utter chaos. And that's what allows the sacred timeline to now no longer be isolated, and instead these guys, the Kang Council, can now see it. And I covered in an earlier video, I don't think they've ever been dead. I thought they were for a while. I thought He Who Remains won the multiverse war by killing them. No, he won the war by isolating the sacred timeline from these guys. Now they're aware of it. As a result of the end of Loki season 2, I think we're going to see that that's what leads to this post-credit scene. So I think I said earlier, right, that you can watch Loki season 1 and 2 back to back before you watch Quantumania, because I think technically speaking, this post-credit scene is after the end of Loki season 2. We'll see, but I don't think right now that they can see the sacred timeline. So anyway, very interesting. All right, so Obi sets the timetable, right? He says, I've run diagnostics every few hundred years, again, showing they live a long time. But so he's able to confidently say, you've got an hour, you're going to be fine, and crash. Okay, you got about 5 minutes. Awesome. He is so fantastic in this role. Love it, love it, love it. All right, so then, unfortunately, Loki time slips again, and without the time stick. And boy, is that nasty. Ugh, yuck. It looks like a scene out of Hellraiser. And it is Halloween month, right? If you've ever seen Hellraiser, that's what you get through most of the movie, is that. Anyway, he says, I might not make it back. And he's right, he might not. Because now he's actually time slipped to the future. Now, this time, I don't think it's very far in the future, because notice the dust where Mobius wrote that word skin, because he's still so worried about losing his skin, he wrote that on the computer with his fingers. So I think we're probably minutes into the future, but clearly the room is cleared out. So that's interesting. So now he's running around trying to find a time stick. Come on, give me a time stick. Why can't I find one? I've never wanted one before, and now I want one. So he's running by and seeing the chaos outside. So again, I think this is probably just a few minutes into the future from where we just were. And then this is interesting, right? The woman on the PA says TVA code 1127. Boy, it'd be nice to have one of those books, wouldn't it? Because it might tell you what to do in the case of a TVA code 1127. So I think that book is really going to come into play. Then he's standing there looking at the monitor, which says loom critical. So yeah, this makes me think the loom is just about to completely blow up. So what's interesting here is this is almost like a reverse butterfly effect because he moved to the future, but the only way he could have moved to the future or come back is by moving to the future and doing whatever he's about to do to go back to the past and pull himself out with that extractor. So it's pretty weird. In this case, instead of going in the past and changing the past and it affects the future, he went to the future to affect the past. Very, very craziness. Speaking of, though, trying to get him out of that with the extractor, poor Mobius puts on the suit, says once these doors open, the temporal radiation will start aging away your suit. Yikes. He realizes there's a crack. Obi does what we all do, grabs the duct tape, sticks it on there. You're good. Love it. Absolutely love it. So poor Mobius heading out. And notice on the right of him, it says always. That's the logo from the TVA, right? For all time, always. Why did they put their logo on the outside? Like no one should ever be out here. That's pretty funny. Of course, branding is very important. You got to remember, branding is important. So he heads out, and that does not look like fun. Absolutely does not look like fun. But once again, we see, right, the raw time on the left, and we see the timelines now in what I believe is the sacred timeline, all nice and pretty, but it's slowly breaking up. I think that literally the sacred timeline, what's containing it and enclosing it and isolating it from those other Kangs, it's falling apart. So wild. All right, so he puts the temporal aura extractor in and shoots out the tether to try to get Loki. And notice he's shooting it to the left of the loom. He's grabbing him when he's raw time. Because remember, OB said that's raw time at that point. Okay, so, well, it's slowly turning into real time, right? As it goes into the loom, it's being turned into timelines. So pretty wild. Anyway, the connection's right there. And I love that image. Gosh, the imagery in this show is so cool. So he's holding on to the lifeline for Loki, hoping Loki's going to come through, right? Well, now Loki, remember, in the future, shortly in the future, but in the future, gets on a phone call. From who? We don't know. So that's a little bit of a mystery. Let me know if you've got thoughts on that. Whoever it was, I think, did the phone call to lure him over to this position because they needed ultimately to prune him, right? That's what he's been looking for the time stick for. Well, then we get Sylvie popping out of the elevator saying, there you are. So she's been looking for him. That's interesting. Obviously going to get paid off as the season goes on. But I don't think she's the one that prunes him because when you watch it, he gets pruned from behind. So someone did the phone call so that somebody else could prune him. And of course, Sylvie's been looking for him. So yeah, I think we're going to see all of this come into play. It could have been a future Loki, could have been a past Loki is pruning him, could have been a Mobius, could have been an OB, could have been He Who Remains. Who knows, right? Let me know what you think in the comments, but I really don't think we know enough to know. We just know that several people were working together to get him to this location so they could prune him. Pretty cool. Then Mobius is realizing, I got to get out of here. I got to get out. So he's starting to head back to safety, but he's still holding out hope. He looks back one last time. Please, Loki. So we get this close-up, and then boom, we see the flash of light, which echoes off of his face mask there, off the glass, and then out comes Loki, still tethered, which is awesome, slams into Mobius, and then they go flying in the building. But this is great. After all Loki's been through, right, he still is single-mindedly focused on, we need to find Sylvie. That's cool. That's really cool. It's like, dude, you just got pruned and pulled back, spread out over time, and then pulled back into the present again, and that's your immediate thought. Very, very cool. But speaking of Sylvie, General Dox is not taking any chances with Sylvie. Notice Hunter B-15 saying, all this is for Sylvie, and D90 is saying, I don't buy it. Yeah, something weird is going on. So we really got to keep an eye on X5 as well as General Dox. The good old X5, man, that dude's a mess. All right, then in the post-credit scene, we see Sylvie heading to a branch. Now, I don't think this means that the sacred timeline never branched because we saw it repeatedly. That's what they were solving as branches. I think they're just telling us for clarity, she is in a branch. She did not go into 1982 in the sacred timeline. She went into, she's in the sacred timeline, but she's not on the main timeline. She is on a branch off of it. So we'll see if that really comes into play and why that's important because obviously I don't know at this point, but I don't think what this is saying is that the timeline is never branched. We've seen that, obviously. All right. Oh, by the way, Broxton, Oklahoma is important in the comics because that's actually where New Asgard is located in the comics. I suspect that's just an Easter egg. I don't think we're going to suddenly see New Asgard here, although we could. That'd be wild. Instead, I think it's just a fun little wink and a nod to Thor and New Asgard. All right, so then she heads into McDonald's and she says she doesn't want squirrel, possum, or rats. She wants something already dead and nothing with a face. I love it. And then she says, I want to try everything. And I love the little smile, just a little bit of this expression of happiness, that she's in a happy place. Very, very cool. So now I want to talk about what's coming next, as well as a big theory, because I really want everybody's opinion on this one. Okay, so when I say what's coming next, well, we still have trailers out there with scenes that we haven't seen yet. So we know she's going to be working at McDonald's. I'm suspecting that's because she ate a bunch of food and can't pay for it. But she also might have realized this is just a happy place. I just want to be here and be away from everything. I messed up at the end of time. I want away from it. Then I don't know that Loki's done time slipping, right? In the trailers, we saw him time slip back with this funny little blow up thing, and he's kind of emulating it with his arms spread out there. And we also saw him go to what looks like a jet ski sales place, watercraft sales place, and that might even be Mobius off of his right shoulder there. So on the left, but on his right. So interesting, very interesting. Also, we know that he time slips and sees himself. I think this is in that future part where he went, and notice he's looking at the manual. Maybe he wants to figure out what that 1127 means. But he's looking at the manual, and then there he is walking in the doorway. And see, he's heading over towards himself, and then he time slips away before he notices himself. So lots going on. And notice this time it seems that the computer monitor says time overload. So goodness gracious, what is going on there? And then this scene, this was from like a second trailer or maybe even a third one, that looks like Victor Timely based on his hairstyle. And they're basically showing Victor Timely a model of, walking down this platform. So I don't know what's going on there, but that is very interesting. So we'll have to see what that's all about. And then finally, I want to go over this theory. So I want to summarize several key points that I talked about in this video, as well as a few points from last season, and come up with this wild theory. So we learned that the loom is where raw time is refined into a physical timeline, right? We also learned it's not constructed to weave so many branches together, but its purpose is to weave the timelines into branches, into the sacred timeline there. We also learned that when something is pruned, it's released from time, which makes sense. And we learned that Alioth is able to consume time and space itself. That's why things are sent to Alioth. And finally, we learned that He Who Remains isolated the timeline by creating a circle, a circular time. So I think that's a really important visual. That circle, we also saw it in Quantumania, where Kang was holding circles. Then there's this scene, which I haven't talked about yet because I saved it to the end. This is from episode 5 of Loki season 1, when basically Sylvie kidnaps Ravonna and says, I want you to show me the end of time. Because remember, they're trying to get to the end of time. And this is the visual that Miss Minutes brings up. Isn't that interesting? So it looks like the sacred timeline, or timelines, like we said, it's wrapped around, a bunch of them in a rope. And then what is that thing on the right? It looks like it's just disintegrating into nothingness, basically. Okay, let's put all this together. The loom is where raw time is formed into timelines. The loom then weaves the timelines together. When something is pruned, it's removed from time. Alioth can consume time and space, and He Who Remains isolated the sacred timeline in a circle. What if we're seeing the two sides of the same thing here, and thus the full circle? Because you can imagine as we go off the right, we just circle back around. It's the sacred timeline. So the end of time, everything disintegrates, right? Alioth is destroying it all. Plus, also, anytime something is pruned, it's sent to Alioth. So either because time ended or because something was pruned, it is turned into raw time. It's then reformed via the loom back into a timeline and then wound into the sacred timeline, where it's then isolated again from the other Kangs. I don't know. This is a way out there theory, I realize, but let me know what you think. Do you think there's any merit to this at all. I think it's fascinating. I hope we learn more about what's going on here. But yeah, the fact that they showed us that visual in season 1 and then now we see this one in season 2 really got me wondering. So let me know. What do you think in the comments? Do you like this idea? Do you think it makes sense? Do you think it ties everything together really nicely? All right. Again, give me your feedback. And don't forget, one reason to give me your feedback, right, is because if you're a subscriber and you leave a comment, you might be one of those 5 random winners announced in early November that can choose between the books and the steelbooks. And then also, as always, I will have a pinned comment that links to the Discord server. Here we are talking about this episode. Oh, we've been talking a lot about this episode on the Discord. Love to have you join us. Pinned comment with an invite. Also, if you don't mind, like this video, subscribe if you haven't already. You can check out more content, and we'll all continue to enjoy the ever-changing, ever-branching Marvel Cinematic Universe.